So what I want to talk about in the next 40 minutes or so is sort of the importance of user experience when it comes to designing search solutions. How that should be is something that we should not leave to the last sort of mile of an application design. Keep the user experience and the sort of search interface design sort of in mind from the beginning of a project. And I'll finally sort of give some demos and sort of examples of how. Oh, sorry. Is that better? Is there a volume on the? It's on, yeah. All right. Hey, is that better? Yeah. Okay, I'll speak louder. Yeah. Yeah. So and sort of I'll give some examples of the Fusion App Studio, how that allows us to very rapidly build search applications to any requirements and any audience in sort of minutes and hours rather than sort of spending weeks on a custom solution. So let me start at the beginning. So the main reason why we're all here in Vegas, apart from the casinos, is the search engine. And as we all know, sort of search engines are quite powerful sort of pieces of software that allow us to sort of very efficiently retrieve information sort of to users' questions, often loose questions. And that's in a way that's quite different from relational databases, which are sort of designed mainly to store information efficiently and sort of very optimized on the storage side. So search engines allow the users to sort of phrase questions in a way that guides them to sort of find the information they're after using spell checking, synonyms, et cetera, to sort of navigate the sort of corpus of data they've indexed. But the main sort of focus typically in a typical search application design is to sort of focus on the sort of hard stuff, the heavy lifting that happens in the back end. So in order to get the information in a shape that users can actually start to use it, we obviously need the connectors to get data indexed. We have to focus on the security aspects, trimming of users' permissions and so on. We might want to look at recommendations, relevancy tuning, and some sort of more advanced features in a modern search application. And then we have a whole host of machine learning, learning to rank, and other sort of features that require a lot of work in the back end and on the sort of data science side. And this focus on the engine, whilst obviously important to ensure that the data is in a way that the users can actually interact with it, means that the sort of main sort of success criteria of a project, which is the actual application interface that people sort of interact with and touch and sort of see, is often neglected and left to the last sort of mile of an application, which means that we sort of neglect the actual users of the applications, which are the main stakeholders that we obviously have to design for. And the problem with sort of designing user experience traditionally has been that it's really hard to sort of specify a user experience from sort of wireframes and sort of traditional methods of speccing out a project sort of through waterfall diagrams and so on, because ultimately sort of people interact best with things they can actually sort of touch and see and interact with dynamically, rather than sort of having specs and wireframes that are static and may not sort of match the expectations of the user when it comes to the actual delivery. And this often leads to sort of a chasm between the sort of developers and the actual business, and the solution that they deliver can often be sort of quite different from what the business had in mind at the beginning of a project. And so the most search engines in the enterprise, they often ship with some kind of basic user interface, but for an actual application, we often need to sort of tailor this, and sort of the out-of-the-box UI is typically often sort of quite limiting from that perspective. So often the only solution is to build from scratch, but we find that sort of as developers take on that sort of design from day one, the solution that they deliver is often not quite up to the requirements. And the problem here is that designing a user interface and sort of keeping in mind all the different UI patterns and interactions that people expect in a modern search application is just really hard. And when you couple that with security, browser support, mobile readiness, et cetera, it's just a lot more work than people often anticipate at the beginning. So that brings me to the sort of approach that sort of we have taken both through my experience in my previous company, TwigKit, and now through the sort of Fusion App Studio team at Lucidworks. So our belief was that if we sort of identify these sort of common user interface and user interaction patterns in search, and we break these down into the logical components, then we could basically sort of have a sort of suite of application modules that allows to build any kind of user experience that customers might want. So that goes from fast, responsive sort of applications to any sort of level of sophistication, and sort of which ensure that the application is enterprise ready from the outset. And sort of when it comes to actually using the modules and the libraries that we have sort of using our sort of App Studio, the key thing is to keep in mind the audience that we're designing for. Because the same sort of, there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to user interfaces. And the sort of era of delivering sort of 10 billion links in a search box is something that sort of modern audiences are not just are not going to be sort of sufficient with. And one of the things that we are seeing more and more with our customers is that people are sort of expecting the application to actually answer the questions that they might have in a very sort of specific domain of the enterprise that we're delivering in. So rather than just searching and getting sort of documents from a Solar index, people want to find, identify fraud in a system, or find sort of molecules that match certain patterns, or find people that relate to certain patterns of sort of activity in the logs, let's say. So it's about identifying the entities and sort of the objects that people want to find and identify and ultimately action on, and not just identifying sort of documents that sort of we may be storing in a backend system. And this sort of level of specialization means that as people have applications tailored to the needs and specialization, the need to have more and more sort of high-level rich features becomes apparent. So as people have more specialized requirements, we're starting to see data visualization requirements that mean that we have to be able to search on a map, we have to be able to sort of navigate through charts on multiple levels and so forth. And that's just not something you see in sort of traditional basic search interfaces on a sort of a website, let's say. So the more specialized the use case, the more refined user experience people expect. And that goes from sort of the way we represent data. So going from sort of the most generic website way of representing results to highly specific use cases in sort of defense or pharmaceuticals, people expect to see information presented in a way that sort of gives them the information they need at sort of a quick glance, and allows them to action on that and sort of click on sort of on things that actually brings them to the various systems that they might be connecting. So here's a very sort of high-level sort of flow that we are often seeing with our customers more and more, where they sort of want to take their search application beyond just the sort of keyword search, and sort of allowing people to actually sort of navigate the information they have at their disposal through sort of different ways of slicing and dicing the data. So in this example, we sort of might have a landing screen or a dashboard where sort of people come into before they've typed in any keywords, and that sort of gives them a sort of bird's eye view of all the information they have at their disposal, and gives them a way to actually sort of quickly navigate to a particular topic or sort of or typical entity, and sort of without having to type in a keyword. So from that point onwards, they might then decide to go through keyword search, refine through filters, or they might want to explore a particular topic through sort of more of a browse type navigation of the data. And ultimately, they identify documents or entities that they want to sort of explore, and that brings them to what we call sort of landing or detail pages, which are sort of our way of sort of giving a complete 360 view of a particular entity or a topic, sort of by pulling together information from various sources into one sort of view to the user. And this sort of paradigm of having different ways to navigate data means that we can allow people to sort of customize the sort of journey of discovery, all the way from sort of a high-level map of their information landscape before they typed anything in, and before they might even know the question that they're actually trying to ask of the system, through sort of search and filtering, and all the way down to a detailed view that we can sort of custom tailor to the particular application and pull together information from different sources, even different search engines, as I'll get to in a minute. So let me just give an example of this approach with sort of different ways of navigating data. So here's an application that we built based on open data sets from sort of US clinical trials. And we index this into Solr, and we sort of combine that with information from sort of drug databases and sort of academic indices of academic institutions. And we combine that in one sort of application that allows us to sort of navigate the data in ways that I was explaining in that previous diagram. So coming into the application, I might be interested in a particular topic. And sort of before I start the search or click on anything, I can see that I have about 250,000 medical trials in my index. And if I sort of want to narrow that down to a sort of more manageable data set that allows me to actually sort of interrogate the data in detail, I can start by sort of filtering on the topic or condition that I'm interested in. So let's say I want to explore breast cancer. I will look at all trials that have biological interventions, let's say. And I can see that all of the components on the dashboard, they sort of update in real time based on the selections that I'm making at every stage. And the information box at the bottom of the page shows me how many medical trials I have sort of narrowed my data set down to. And keep in mind that we're not talking about documents. These are actual sort of trials that scientists might be interested in finding, even though in the back end, these are obviously Solr documents that we store in the way that we're all used to. So at this point, I might be interested in actually jumping to a search page. And as I do that, you can see that I'm carrying over my sort of previous selection to this page. And I'm now looking at the sort of 300 documents that match my criteria. So if I want to sort of filter on this even further, I can use some of the facet filtering I have available. I might even want to sort of search within some of these facets. Let's say I want to look at psychological effects of cancer. So now I'm down to a couple of documents, a couple of trials, and I might want to explore these further by clicking on them and sort of looking at the details of each of these trials. And the other thing I could do is, you can see all of these sort of different metadata that I'm showing in each of these cards. So what I can do is I can sort of click on any one of these links, and you can see that this actually filters my data set down to that particular choice. And the other thing we could do is I can look at sort of these icons that are next to each entity, and this is a way to allow me to explore that particular, in this case, a sponsor, an institution, in more detail. So if I click on this, I get taken to a sort of data detail page. So this pulls together information on, in this case, the National Cancer Institute. And we're actually behind the scenes making 3 or 4 different search queries to different collections in Solr. We're actually pulling together information from Wikipedia on the fly. We have a Google map. And all of this is sort of transparent to the user, which may not know that they're actually interfacing with a search application, even though all the data retrieval is done through search. And we can see here that sort of apart from the sort of high-level summary we have of this entity, we're also showing related sort of trials that they have sponsored. And I can actually search within these by making choices through some structured navigation, summarizing on a particular period, and so forth. And this sort of, from here on, I can start to click on other entities and start to explore the different sort of faceted views on my data. So it's all, all that we're showing here is information stored in the same corpus. It's just different ways of viewing and sort of and exploring the information. So let me now take a step back and explain how we sort of use the building blocks that I referred to in the App Studio to actually build an application like the one I just showed here. So our sort of high-level architecture is based on the following sort of layers of complexity in sort of the App Studio. So at the bottom we have a sort of generic data access API, sort of a single API for retrieving information from a search engine or a database, and also to push information into the search engine or database if we want to capture information from the end user, for example. So on top of this, we have then sort of a library of generic UI components that allow us to very quickly sort of piece together the exact user interface that we want to build to our sort of stakeholders' requirements. And then to take that from a simple user interface to an application that can be deployed in an enterprise, we have a host of what we call application modules, which are things like security, collaboration, and so forth. That actually means that we can deliver a sort of enterprise-ready, battle-hardened application to a customer without having to do any coding on some of the complex things like security. So the sort of top piece that sits above all that is sort of our editing and sort of insights environment. And by insights, I mean both insights that we can provide to the application designer at the time of them building the application, as well as sort of information that we capture through activity tracking, sort of click tracking, and that can be fed back into the index as sort of click streams. So if you look at this, these in a bit more detail, so on the data abstraction layer, we actually have sort of a generic data access API that allows us to abstract retrieval and sort of the writing of information to an information system. And to this API, we have then sort of connectors or adapters to pretty much any sort of standard search engine or database system that you can find either open source or enterprise. So obviously we have adapters for Fusion and Solar, as well as the sort of other big open source engine, and pretty much any sort of enterprise search vendor. In addition, we have sort of adapters for a lot of sort of information, sort of answering engines or sort of knowledge engines like Wolfram Alpha and IBM Watson, Wikipedia. And these often allow us to combine data from different sources or different silos into one and the same application. And the importance of sort of being able to break down these sort of silos of information is something we come across with our customers again and again. Because it may be sort of simple to the Solar community to say, let's just index everything into one big cluster and get everything in the same index. But in practice, that's often not possible. You might have clinical trial information in IBM Watson, and there might be other systems consuming that in the company. And it's just not, for cost or politics or other technical reasons, it may not be possible to move the data to another silo. So being able to bridge these is a big sort of advantage of having this abstraction. So then we have these sort of user interface components, and the way that we approach that problem is that we basically define these sort of small sort of patterns or sort of components that define the user interface patterns that people are used to dealing with. So these things like facet navigation, showing results as sort of templates or cards on a screen, all the way down to more complex data visualization, whether it's sort of single or multi-level facet sort of display. We allow people to sort of interrogate data through, let's say, hierarchical sort of charts and so on. So all in all, you can take these components and build sort of any kind of applications that users might want, whether it's a dashboard or a traditional sort of search interface. And if you look at this, this is a screenshot from one of our sort of editing environments that we ship with the App Studio. And this is sort of the search interface that I showed you in the application earlier. And each of these components on the page is a sort of a separate module in our sort of pattern library. And the way that we declare them in the application is through sort of our own markup language, which completely divorces the description of the component from the underlying data engine. So that's done through a markup language, which you drop into any HTML page, and which we render in our own sort of rendering engine based on the data that we retrieve from the backend. So going from sort of high-level components, we can build high-fidelity sort of applications through sort of just changing the styling and sort of the sort of branding of an application. So all the other components, they interact, and that's something that we sort of ensure that we get sort of browser compatibility. The applications are sort of responsive by design, which means that the same application works on a tablet, mobile, or a desktop. And that's something you get just out of the box by using these standard components. So the third layer in our sort of App Studio architecture is these sort of enterprise application modules that I was referring to. And these are things that allow us to sort of go from a simple sort of user interface to an enterprise-ready application within days rather than weeks or months, which is the traditional way of designing applications. So highest amongst these is the security. So we've sort of abstracted security from the underlying application, which means that you can define different security providers, different ways of authorizing users through configuration rather than code. And that's obviously critical when it comes to delivering applications that don't have to go through the same issues again and again in penetration tests, because these components have been battle-hardened with customers and sort of pharmaceuticals and banks, which means that most of the sort of issues that tend to come up with security integrations have been sort of covered. We also have ways of sort of allowing users to collaborate on data, to bookmark, share information, add them to baskets, export them to different media. activity tracking, geospatial search, federating across different silos, and so forth. Pretty much any kind of pattern of interacting with data through search that you can imagine is something we've seen over sort of 10 years of working in this industry. So with all these components and all these sort of different patterns that I've been talking about, it's sort of, you might think that it's easy to actually go from sort of a Solr schema to an application based on all the tools that we have at our disposal. But the fact is that, from basic JSON or XML, it can often be hard for someone who's not sort of trained in sort of UI or sort of UX design to actually figure out sort of what's the best way to map my data into an interface that at least gives me sort of 80–90% of the way of the application that I want to deliver to the customer. And that's particularly true when you come, when you have an existing index and maybe the schema wasn't really designed well at the beginning, and there are fields in the index that some of them should be there, some of them shouldn't, as we all probably know from experience. So, to the designer of an application, even though they have all the tools, it can have to be really sort of hard to actually map that out in the best way. And we've seen with sort of a lot of our customers that we would have approached things differently. And sort of what we have sort of baked into the App Studio is an insights engine that now allows our customers to actually sort of to allow them to pick the right sort of visualization and presentation of the data through sort of an iterative process where they're setting up an application. So the kinds of questions that we often ask when we come on site, and which we now sort of codified into our sort of insights engine, are things like, what fields should I be showing in what way in my results? What's a good field to show as facets? And if I have facets, how should I be presenting these? Should I be choosing a histogram? Should I be choosing like a pie chart, or should they be listed out? Should there be a sort of search within option? Do I want to have a multi-select choice, and so forth? And a lot of these sort of choices can be, to people who have worked with search, over many years, it's quite obvious when you look at a schema what you should be mapping out. But to a novice, it may not be so obvious. So we have this ability now to actually guide people to a good solution and sort of give them a recipe that at least takes them from sort of 0 to 80–90% of the way. And that gives them an application that can actually start to interact with and sort of present to the stakeholders. So that being said, I'm going to break one of the sort of key rules of Vegas, which is to never do a live code demo on stage. So let me just put this up. So, sorry? That's universal, yeah, but we're in Vegas. So, so what I've done here is I've just booted up a fresh application that I just downloaded before our talk. And this is sort of the wizard that we get presented when we start up the App Studio. And the intention here is that we're going to guide the user to actually picking the right fields, picking the right facets they want to show, and building an application that at least gets them from a blank slate to a decent cut to represent the data. So what I've done is I have a Fusion running, demos of Lucidworks.io, and I'm going to sort of use that as my base index to sort of choose data from and choose facets and fields from a particular collection and pipeline. So if I start here, I might type in the URL of the server. We connect to that. It's fine. So what we then do as part of our Fusion version of this wizard is we can actually see which security mechanisms are in place in that engine. So we present the user with the two sort of realms that they can authenticate against. And let me just type in my credentials here. So I'm unable to authenticate because I chose the wrong realm. So if I choose the sort of LDAP realm, I can authenticate using these credentials. So now that I'm authenticated, we can list out all the collections and in Fusion parlance, all the pipelines, query pipelines that we might want to use to build our application. So from this, I might sort of, have a collection of collections. I'll choose the enterprise search one. And from that choice, the engine sort of looks at the pipelines that we have available based on common patterns in sort of Fusion pipeline setup. We'll suggest these following pipelines. I can obviously choose my own if I'm not following standard naming convention. But in this case, I'm going to choose one of these. And what we're doing here is we're now actually sort of able to connect to, let me choose the wrong one here. Sorry, choose the one. We're now able to connect to Fusion using a particular query pipeline and collection. And the sort of 3 or 4 seconds that we had to wait was the time it took our insights engine to sample data from the index, look at the facets that we might be getting back, and look at the facets that we might want to suggest to the user, which they haven't defined in the collection already, and inspect some of the fields that are coming back from the index, and sort of look at how they might map to the particular template that we want to build for the user and the user interface. So at this stage of the visit, we're actually helping the user to sort of define the card layout of the results in the search interface. And we can see that the Insights engine has inspected the data, and it comes up with suggestions. So it's suggesting we use a field called name X. And the way it does that suggestion is by looking at the corpus of data we've sampled, seeing sort of what coverage of the documents we have does this field actually cover. So in this case, it's most of the fields actually have a name field present. We can look at sort of, for a title field in a document, we typically want to have, a text field that's fairly short and one that's ideally unique or near unique across the corpus. So that would be a good title to show, for results in a search interface. So we take that suggestion, and we can see also that it's inspected the sort of corpus for what might be a good way to link to a URL. So we can obviously sort of inspect fields that are coming back, see if they're valid URLs, relative or absolute, and how distinct they are across the corpus. So we can see that we have a field called URLX, which is distinct, is present in all the fields, and is mostly distinct in our documents. So as we make these choices, we can actually sort of flip back and forth between what our results will look like and the markup that we're generating. So you do remember that I was explaining how each of our components is represented by sort of HTML-like markup on a sort of in an application. And we can see sort of in real time, based on the fields we're choosing here, how the markup will change. So that's the markup that we will sort of build the application from. But as a developer, I might even take this markup and sort of copy that into another application if I wanted to. So let me take the suggestion again. We'll click next. We're next sort of prompted for a field that we might want to use to show a short snippet or a summary for each of the results. And again, so here we're sampling the data, and we're looking for text fields that have 1 or 2 paragraphs of data. We don't want like a whole body of documents present, but we want sort of something that's fairly sort of has a bit amount of data, which might be used as a snippet or a description for each of our fields. If I inspect the values we have here, I can see that I actually have a field called body, which might be something I would choose here. But in reality, this is the whole document of a consumed website. So that's why the Insights engine didn't recommend this, because it was just too long to show on a page. So I'll use the answer field. Now we sort of get to the point where we sort of want to choose sort of facets to show on our page, and which of these facets we might want to show as additional metadata in our cards. So let me choose some of these options. Some of these might be coming actually back as facets from the collection. Others might not be present as facets, but would be good candidates based on the heuristics that we use in the inside. So I'm going to include this in my metadata. I can see here there's a field called a facet called authors, and you can see the recommendation that the engine is giving me here, and it's saying that I should probably consider having sort of the ability to search within the facet, and that's based on the fact that this facet has a large number of distinct values. So we have about 83 values that we found based on our sampling, which means that you're not going to show that in the UI as one long list. So it might be useful to actually have a sort of way to search within that, which allows the user to actually identify kind of the long tail of the facet in the UI. So let me actually do that. I'll call this authors. I'll enable search within. And then you go through the list, and you can pick each of these. For each of the facets that we get presented with, we can see sort of sample values. And that gives the developer sort of a really quick way of checking the validity of these suggestions. Because these might sort of correspond to fields that they have seen from the connector or from the way they set up the crawl. So do names, and so on. Just choose a few of these. OK. So with this choice, we're now ready to build the application. So I'll give it a title. And we might choose a color scheme. And we then take all the choices the sort of developer gave as part of this, this process. We build an application, and this is according to the spec of the choices that we made. So we can see here that for author, we actually have search within. So we can start typing G, pick Grant. And this is, it's not the finished product, but at least it's giving us an interface that we can sort of build within minutes and might hopefully give us like a first cut and something we can actually present to our stakeholders and give them a view of the data that is otherwise locked in an unintelligible format in the index. And we can see that this application is out of the box. We have it's ready for mobile, so we can see on a large screen we're showing the results in 2 columns. On a tablet, this might collapse to 1 column, and then on a mobile device, we hide the facets and we allow them to sort of scroll in and out as a sort of slider. OK, I think we're running out of time. So hopefully that gave you sort of an idea of how sort of our approach of identifying user interface patterns, UX patterns, and how we can use the App Studio and its sort of library of components and sort of UX patterns to actually build an application very quickly. Using our sort of insights engine, we are now able to help the designer of an application to actually go from an index to a fully working application, mobile ready, representing the data in a true meaningful way within a few minutes, which is something that, like I say, sort of gets them most of the way to the solution they're after. And at least it gives them a way to interrogate the data and see if there's anything they need to do on the index side to close that loop and make sure the information is in a way that users expect. Thank you. So we've got a couple of minutes for questions, if any. Yeah. Hey. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if you heard the question. So he was asking whether, with a lot of the UI components, there are other options that we didn't present through this wizard. So you might want to say for a facet, just show the 5 values, and then you expand that to show another 10, let's say. So when we build these sort of the wizard we have in the App Studio, we're limiting some of the options that we give to the user, and then they can go sort of afterwards into the markup and customize it, to their. Exactly, yeah. That's right, yeah. So I mean, a lot of the times it's just for our customers and ourselves when we're building application, it's finding a good template and just getting that initial cut of the application. That's what takes bulk of the time. And then from that point onwards, it's just refinement, rinse, lather, repeat, making sure you order the facets in a certain way, remove certain fields that are not coming back in the right format, apply date formatting, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, saving you the time to go from, like I say, a blank slate to an application that actually works. You can deploy, you can show it to your stakeholders, you can sort of start a conversation with the business to actually see is this actually what you want to see? And that's just such, has so much more meaning to people than just showing a wireframe and high fidelity sort of mock-ups, which look nice, but is it actually giving them the data and the way of interacting with the data that they want to do? Say again, sir? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, lorem ipsums and mockups are not, that's not something that people sort of associate with when it comes to data. And sort of, we usually find that you can show people a demo, but the best demo is ultimately one that has their own data, because they never know how long it took to build a demo. That might have been a month's effort to actually tweak together. But if you can sort of drop this in to an existing Solr index or engine you might have on site, you can build an application within a few minutes, and you show it to them on screen. And it's their actual data that they can start to play with. That just inspires confidence, and it means that they show that they see that they can actually build and deliver a project on time and to their requirements. That's right.
What happens if you want the
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, so, right. So that's something we often do, and sort of, you might have, let's say you have different entities in your corpus. So you might be searching either drugs or clinical trials or doctors, and sort of based on, like you said, based on the path or the journey you're taking to finding a piece of data. Typically we provide, as part of the design of the application, you might have sort of user-friendly URLs that lead you to that entity or that sort of view of the data. And that's a way in which you can use the context of the journey of the user to actually filter down. So you might have, you might go from /doctors/ the name of the doctor / patients / the name of the patient, and that allows you to actually sort of interrogate and have a way to even bookmark a particular result or results if it's a search output. Yeah. Yeah, and so everything you can do sort of through, just tweaking, using the markup components that we have for each of these modules that we provide. The sort of App Studio visit that I showed you, again, this just takes you to a good starting point. And from that point onwards, you can just tweak the components by providing different inputs. You might, in your case, you might actually be shooting sort of multiple queries on the page, and then you see, like, did we get a result from the restaurant collection, in which case I'm going to show the top result as a smart panel, or did we get a result from whatever else you might want to search? So that's something we do quite often. And sort of the key advantage of having our sort of data abstraction is that you're using the same query language, whether you're searching through Solr or Elasticsearch or the GSA or whatever else you may have in your organization. And sort of through the same query language and the same UI components, it doesn't matter where the data comes from. You can show these sort of results and these documents in different ways, and whether it's cards or.
It's a web service application.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question actually to the earlier question on dynamic facets. This is a use case that's particularly common in e-commerce, where you have thousands of facets, but only some are relevant to a particular product.
Yeah.
And so you always have to come up with reviews, and Lucidworks use rules to do this that a recent customer would work with. But is there a way that, I was just thinking that maybe the way the introspection that you're doing would go more granular to be able to figure out, okay, for this value, these cluster of documents always have the same.
Yeah.
So like a wrench is different from a blouse.
Yeah. No, I don't know if you heard the question, but you're saying, like, depending on the context and depending on how you're navigating your application, you might actually be shown different facets and you might even have different ways of showing the results. Right. And yeah, that's something we do quite frequently, and sort of typically have, you might go to, /people, you get people results, and you have different templates for these, and obviously different facets. And normally what you do is, when you start from the sort of top level down, sort of at the highest level, you end up showing the common information and the common facets that sort of go across all of your domain. And then as you narrow down to a particular department or entity or sort of topic, you might get more specialized. So, we did a project with a customer where they had sort of true enterprise search across all the data, and sort of on the landing sort of main search screen, you would only see a handful of facets that sort of cut across all the types of data they have, author, date, that sort of thing. But as you narrow down to projects or people, you start to see different pieces of information. So that can either be configured in the engine, or they could be rules that you do in the App Studio. It just depends on the capabilities of the system you have. Yeah. So a lot of the times, this kind of information belongs kind of in the back end through rules, like you say. Sorry, we run out of time. Yeah. Thank you.